Crazy Dave is one of the more interesting serial killers. You know, the ones that fully know that what they're doing is wrong. They are disgusted in themselves. They think it's horrific to commit murder. They hate that they do it. Yet for some reason, they always find themselves finding a way to commit murder again. At that point, is murder an addiction? Is this feeling that they're chasing an addiction? Today we're going to talk about David Morst, aka Crazy Dave, the teen boy slayer. But before we get into the case, I just want to thank NordVPN for sponsoring this video. If you go to nordvpn.com/Eleanor, the link is down below in the description, there will be an exclusive deal waiting for you there, and it is completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. I personally always use a VPN, and I have done for years, because there are so many benefits to having one that it's like a no-brainer at this point. So number one, it helps you stay safe on the internet. A VPN acts as a barrier between you and all of your personal information that you want to keep safe and anyone out there that might be trying to access it or hack you in any way. Basically, all you do is open the NordVPN app, and with just one click, you pick a country and NordVPN will make it appear as though you're operating from that country. And this comes with a load of benefits in itself. Because you appear as though you're operating from said country, for example, I use American VPNs a lot because I like to use the American Netflix. When you go on to a different country, you can access the internet as though you're in that country. So their streaming service selections, their news platforms, different things that are available in different countries that we don't get in our own countries. And of course, there is the threat protection feature that you get with NordVPN, which I think is amazing. It turns it into just a powerful cybersecurity tool as well as a VPN. It helps to block intrusive ads, it checks things that you download for potential malware, it does so many more things. It's just really useful. Like I said, it's a no-brainer to have a VPN like this. So like I said, if you do want to try it out, go to nordvpn.com/Eleanor, the link is down below in the description. There'll be an exclusive deal waiting for you there, and it is completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Quickly, before we get into the case, I just want to give my usual disclaimer that I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this video. This video is for educational purposes, and everything that I'm about to say is just information that I have found on the internet and I'm compiling into one video. There's a couple of content warnings on this video, so if you don't want to hear about the following topics, then please click out now. In today's case, we're going to be discussing themes of child abuse, mental illness, rape, and suicide. So like I said, if you don't want to hear about any of that right now, I completely understand. Click out, go look after yourself. Hopefully I'll get to see you again some other time with a different video. But with all that being said, let's get into the case. So like I said, today we're talking about a serial killer known as Crazy Dave, which is one hell of a serial killer nickname, isn't it? David Edward Morst was born on April 5th, 1954 in Pennsylvania to parents George and Eva, who were both very effed up in their own ways. His father George had had a very abusive and traumatic childhood, so that was definitely affecting his parenting style, but also he was never really home. He spent as much time as he could at work or in the pub or anywhere but home. He didn't want to spend time particularly with his wife because his wife, Eva, David's mother, was very, very mentally ill, like severely mentally ill to the point where she was having violent outbursts. She was very aggressive. She was just very tumultuous in her emotions. She's been described as marginally functioning. She was barely even a human being, never mind a mother to multiple children. I think there was 4 in total, David and all of his siblings. And of course, her husband's away at work or in the pub all the time. She's very, very mentally ill, and caring for 4 kids on her own, she wasn't doing well at all. And of course, because George was never really home, the people that got the brunt of Eva's anger and her outbursts were her 4 children. She was verbally and physically abusive towards the kids. She would shout at them, scream at them, beat them physically. She would scream at them all the time. She would withhold food as punishment, like starve her kids. Some sources even said that she sexually abused her son. Then, when David was just 7 years old, his father filed for divorce against his mother, and this was gonna leave her a single mother to 4 children. Again, she was very mentally ill. There is no way that she could cope on her own in those circumstances. She just couldn't handle it, and within 2 years, she ended up giving David up at the age of 9 years old. But she didn't give him up to like a care home or into foster care or anything like that. She gave him up to a mental institution. She claimed that David was very mentally ill and needed urgent care. She said that he had actually tried to kill his younger brother twice. And his younger brother was a baby as well. She said that there was one time where he tried to light his crib on fire with some matches. There was another time that apparently he tried to drown him in like a swimming pool or like a lake. So the mental institution are hearing all of this from this boy's mum, and they're like, oh my god, okay, they take him in, you know, they're doing all these assessments and stuff. But they're realizing over time that like, this kid doesn't seem anything like what his mother was describing. This was relatively common at the time, that parents that were either mentally ill themselves or parents that just knew they couldn't care for their children, they would sometimes drop them at mental institutions and just claim that they were mentally ill so that the hospitals would take them in and care for them. I mean, I don't understand why you would opt for a hospital when there are care homes and foster care. That is still an option. I would maybe understand if that wasn't an option anymore and you just desperately needed somewhere for the kid to go. But, oh, I definitely didn't say this before, but it's doubted that he tried to kill his little brother at all. Obviously, if he had tried to kill his little brother twice, he probably does need putting in a mental institution. But that is very highly doubted because, like I say, Eva was really, really mentally ill to the point where she was delusional. She would lie a lot, whether that was conscious lying or subconscious lying. Maybe she didn't mean to lie. Maybe she just believed her delusions so powerfully. But either way, it's not entirely believed that he tried to kill his brother when he was younger. But at the same time, we don't know. We weren't there, so maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But either way, he is in this mental institution now, and it was awful. As were pretty much all mental institutions at the time. They were really kind of abusive. They were very strict. This one in particular had like really bad hygiene and just basic stuff like that. It was genuinely like torture living in this hospital. Everything was neglected, from like patient care to basic human rights, a clean toilet, you know. He shared a bedroom, which was not a bedroom, it was just like a big hall with 50 other boys. And bear in mind, most of them are like criminals, or they're dangerous, or they're very mentally ill. That's why they're there. That's why they're in this mental institution. And it was quite frustrating for David going through all of this because he knew that he didn't belong there. He was trying to tell people, and honestly, the staff noticed that he wasn't very mentally ill. I mean, maybe he might have had something or other, but the staff certainly didn't think that he was mentally ill enough to warrant being in hospital. You know, he's taking up a bed that someone else could have, someone that really truly needs it. And it was deemed that David wasn't a danger to himself or to anyone else. There was no need for him to be in this hospital anymore. He had been there for quite some time, to say that they've known that he wasn't mentally ill for quite a while. They'd kept him there regardless because I think they'd figured out that his mother was very mentally ill and that was the situation here. So they kept him, I think, just to let his mother have some time off to get better, I guess. I think they knew the home situation and they thought that the hospital would be a better place for David Morse right now at this point in his childhood. So he was there for a few years. And honestly, the only thing that they noted about his mental health the whole time that he was there was that he used to just get sad about his mum and dad's divorce. He used to miss his mum and his dad, and he felt rejected and abandoned by them. I think that was kind of what was making him the most sad. But even then, he wasn't mentally ill. He was a child going through divorce. It's natural for him to feel upset and to feel abandoned and rejected. Those are feelings that children of divorce do have to process. Doesn't mean they need to be in a mental institution. So, when David was 13 years old, the hospital discharged him, and Eva put up a fight. She did not want her son to come home. She wanted the hospital to keep him, and they were like, I'm sorry, but we can't. He doesn't need to be here, and there are a lot of other children that do. So take him back. So Eva took him back, but she didn't want him, and she made that very clear. She was not nice to this child. I don't know what she was like to the other ones, or if it was specifically with David, but she was not nice to him at all. He felt very unwelcome in her house. She didn't want to look after him. She didn't want him there. She didn't want David to be in her household, in her family, and so she sent him off to a care home this time. He went to like an all-boys home / school kind of thing. And this was when his situation went from bad to worse, because once he joined this school, he was sexually assaulted by one of the older boys. And this was his first ever sexual experience, was being exploited and violated like that in a very new setting as well. That really sets the tone for him starting at this care home school thing. David said that he absolutely hated that situation that he went through, of course, but he did say that it kind of opened his eyes to a whole other situation that he'd never even thought about before, and that was having sex with another man. He'd never even considered that in his brain until this boy forced himself on him. As awful as that was, it made him realise that that was a thing that he could do now. Not rape anyone, not sexually assault anyone, just have sex with another man. Over the coming weeks, David noticed that this was quite a common thing in this care home school thing. A lot of the boys, because it was an all-boys home, and teenage boys, you know, they're discovering things about themselves and they're experimenting, and when there's only other lads around, they start doing it together. Basically, what I'm trying to say is everyone in this school was basically hooking up with each other, and David noticed that, and he was like, maybe I'm gonna try that. So he approached one of his friends and he offered him a packet of cigarettes if he would perform a sex act on him. And I think the friend obliged. So that was his first like proper sexual experience that was not, you know, the horrible first one. From then on, life at the care home wasn't so bad. Apart from that first traumatic day, I don't know if it was on the first day that happened, but that first traumatic experience that he had was a one-off. From that point on, he got on well with the rest of the boys. He was getting on with his studies. He was experimenting, you know. He was an incredibly intelligent person, was David Most. He was known to have really, really good memory, really good fact recall. He was apparently really good with like numbers and dates. And yeah, overall, he was getting on really well at this school. His grades were doing all right. Honestly, to say that he had such a traumatic and turbulent childhood, his grades maintained really well. I think he was just naturally very intelligent to the point where even going through loads of shit in his life couldn't knock that. He wasn't going to lose focus. It was just naturally who he was. So yeah, he settled in really, really well at this all-boys home, but it wasn't long before disturbing thoughts started to creep in. He was having thoughts about hurting the people around him, hurting his classmates, and it's not clear how long he'd been having these thoughts, but the first time he actually acted on them was when he was 13 years old. He was just out playing with another kid when he just grabbed this other boy by the throat and started choking him with his bare hands. He held it for a while as well. Like, he had hold of this boy for such a long time that he was like gasping, he was going red. He could see that this boy was panicking. He thought he was gonna die. And that was finally when David let go. The kid survived this ordeal, even though it must have been traumatic. He held his throat until near passing out. That was David's first, noted violent outburst. We don't know if there were some before that, but this is the first one that he himself has, admitted to. And he said that he felt really remorseful after it, actually. But that didn't stop him from doing the exact same thing again 2 years later. Now he was 15 years old, he was still in this care home, and one day he and another boy were sitting alone in a room watching TV when he literally just launched himself at this lad and started strangling him again. Again, he let go just as this boy was getting to the brink of passing out. He pushed it until the very limit, and then he would let go. I don't think at this point that he was aiming to kill. I don't think he was looking to kill. I think he was just looking to inflict pain and terror and fear. He wanted to see it in his victim's face, and then when he realised that it had kind of gotten to enough now, he would get off. But it was actually this second boy that he did it to. This boy ran and told the teachers or the staff at the care home, and they got David Morst sent back to the mental institution. And he absolutely hated it there. So did every other kid in there. They all desperately wanted out. And David got there and he very quickly made friends with a couple of other lads who felt the exact same way, and they all came up with a plan together to try and escape the hospital. I don't know how on earth they did it, but they successfully managed to get off of hospital grounds. So they were all out into the world and they all decided to just like run in their separate directions. They all had different places that they were going. I presume most of them were going home. That was where David was gonna go. He was gonna try and find his way back to his mother's house. So he walked and walked and walked until he got there, and he hadn't been home in years, not properly anywhere. But he never expected things to have changed as much as they had. When he walked into that house, his mother had a new boyfriend. She was acting totally different. She didn't seem to want him at all. She very clearly did not appreciate her son being back in her life. And within a few days of him being there, she was already pushing him to sign up for the army, just to get him out of her hair. And honestly, right now, that didn't sound too bad to David. He didn't feel appreciated or accepted at home, and so he thought, fine, yeah, I will go in the army. He was very, very young when he was accepted into the army. In fact, a few people I've seen online have speculated that his mother lied on the applications, put the wrong birthday so that she could get him sent in earlier than he was actually allowed. So yeah, he was really, really young, and the first place that he was stationed was Frankfurt in Germany. David's job in the army was actually going to be a chef. So they put him in loads of like cooking courses. They made him, I don't know, learn to cook, because he wasn't going to be out on the front lines, you know, like fighting for his life or anything. He was going to be a cook in the military base. And this base that he was put on, by the way, it wasn't just for people in the army. It kind of housed anyone, mainly people in the army, of course, but there were just, you know, normal families that lived there as well. So naturally, he got chatting to a bunch of strangers and he ended up befriending mainly young boys. There was one in particular, a 13-year-old called James McClister, and he really, really looked up to David Morst. He kind of saw him as like an older brother figure, maybe even like a father figure, but he just thought he was so cool, and he wanted to be just like David. David was an avid bowler on the army bowling team. I didn't know that was a thing, but he was on the team. He was really good at it. He used to take James to the bowling alley that they had on the military base site. I don't know. And he used to like teach him how to do it, show him how he does it so well. And James was fascinated by David. Their relationship was, of course, very predatory. David wasn't in this just to teach a kid how to bowl. He was attracted to this 13-year-old kid. We don't know if their relationship did actually progress into sexual abuse or not, but I mean, we know what David's intentions were there, and they weren't wholesome. James would go around to David's house a lot, which David very quickly became paranoid about, obviously, because he's literally living amongst hundreds of his co-workers, and a child is seen going into his bedroom multiple nights a week, staying there, leaving the next morning. He started to get very paranoid about what his colleagues that lived around him would think, rightly so. The closest thing that we have to admittance of anything sexual between these two is a diary or journal entry that David Morst wrote, where he said he woke up one morning. He was about, I want to say he was 18, 19 years old at this point, and James is 13. He said he woke up one morning, they were both laid in his bed, both naked, and James was laid on top of him. A 13-year-old child. It's believed that this incident, when he woke up to James on top of him, this was a reality check moment for David Morst. He had these every now and again where he would get really heinous. He would commit some of the worst shit ever, and then he would have like a reality breaking moment where he's like, fuck, what am I doing? And I think this was another one of those moments where he woke up to this kid on top of him and he was like, oh my God, this relationship is twisted. And I think it was at this point that David knew that he had to do something about it. He knew he had to end this relationship, but he wasn't gonna do it in any kind of easy way. Not long after that incident took place, David persuaded James to go on a bike ride with him. Motorbike ride. David drove a motorbike and he was like, just get on the back. And so he did. He hopped on the back of this bike. James was really excited, wrapped his arms around David, and they drove off. They drove for miles and miles until they kind of just got out into the middle of nowhere. They ended up on a dirt track where David stopped this bike and the two of them jumped off. And this was where everything switched. When they got off of that bike, it was like James was getting off with a completely different David. David had suddenly turned cold and unemotional. He was just different. He grabbed James and dragged him over to a tree. He held him against the tree as he pulled some rope out of his pocket and tied this kid to the tree. And once he had this scared little boy tied up and unable to defend himself, David Morse just starts beating him with his bare hands. And then when he got bored of that, he found a wooden plank on the floor, picked that up, started doing it with that. He beat him continuously for minutes and minutes and minutes on end until eventually he had killed him. James McLister was murdered by one of the men that he loved the most in this world. Someone that he viewed as an older brother figure that was there to protect him and teach him things. Someone that he trusted more than anyone. David untied James's dead body from the tree and he just dropped it on the floor and then covered it over with leaves and then fled the scene. Didn't even bother to dig him a shallow grave. He just shoved leaves over him and got out of there. The body remained there for a whole month until it was found. Somehow, this must have been a very isolated area because for it to just be covered with leaves, I'm surprised that wasn't found sooner. Police were actually very quick to get to David Morse as a suspect in this case. Maybe not a suspect, more so a person of interest, because of course, they'd spoken to a load of James McLister's friends and they had mentioned this older 19-year-old David that James was always hanging out with. So police looked into it. They found David Morse. Police spoke with him within the first week of James's disappearance. So before they'd even found a body, they didn't even know this was a murder case yet. Police spoke with David Morse and they near enough ruled him out. They didn't think that he had anything to do with this. But now that the case was a murder, now that they'd found his body, they decided to essentially refresh the whole case and they went back to look at David. But this time they had more evidence against him. I don't know what they had, but probably from finding the body, they were then able to find more evidence there. They had more evidence against David Morse this time, and they told him that. They let him know that they had something against him. And this just completely broke him. He just broke down and confessed to murdering James McLister. But he said it was an accident, right? He said that the two of them had been out on that motorbike and they'd gotten into a crash, an accidental crash, and it had killed James. And David felt so bad that he had been the one to invite James onto the back of his bike and then crash it and kill this poor boy that he didn't want to admit to anyone that he was dead. And so he just panicked and hid the body and just carried on as if nothing had happened. That was what David Morse told the police. We know that's not true, but that's what he told them. He swore to police that he didn't mean to do it. It was just a tragic accident and he dealt with it in a less than favourable way. That was what he was trying to say. And for some reason, people believed it, which makes me so mad. So they've found the body at this point. How can you not tell the difference between a kid that's been beaten to death with someone's hands and a plank of wood versus what the body would look like from a motorbike accident? I don't know, would they look the same? Surely there's differences between how the body would have been found. But either way, David Morse was not charged with murder. Instead, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter and he was sentenced to 4 years in prison for the death of James McLister. No one knew at this point that he had murdered him. And honestly, David Morse kind of liked it in prison. He was kind of thriving in there. That was his thing, because he knew now that he was a danger to society and he didn't want to be in it. He didn't like what he'd done to James McLister. He immediately regretted it. And at least here in prison, he knew that he was away from society and he couldn't do that. And it gave him a lot of peace to know that he didn't have to control himself and control those urges himself, the prison wasn't going to let him kill anyone, so he was safe there. David Morst was a model prisoner. He was very well behaved. He completed a course to get a diploma. He was doing a bunch of different skill courses. He would write home to his family like every week. He did a lot for like their little community. He was actually so well behaved in prison that he was offered the chance to apply for parole early, which he actually turned down because, like I said, he wanted to be in prison. He was scared of being released because he was scared of what he was capable of. He had a real urge to kill, or at least to cause very serious harm, and this urge was with him nearly 24/7. It was very rare that he wasn't feeling it, and sometimes he would feel it so much that he felt that he didn't have control over whether he acted on it or not. He didn't want to leave prison and risk acting on these depraved urges again, but he couldn't stay in prison forever, and in 1977, David was released at the age of 23. He was sent back out into the world. He moved to Chicago when he was released. He got another job. He really tried to do like a whole fresh start thing. Well, that's what he kind of made it look like. That's what he made it appear to be. But actually, David had started hanging around in a lot of places where he knew he would interact with young boys. Teenage boys. He would spend a lot of his free time at the skate park or at swimming pools or at arcades, the cinema, game shops, literally anywhere that young boys flock to. So would David Morst. So on the one hand, he's saying, I don't want to be this awful murderer, this violent, aggressive person. So he's preventing himself from acting on those urges, yet he's still being a paedophile, still being a predator, still, you know, spying on young boys, swimming. There was one particular boy that David was seen with a lot, and we don't know this boy's name, but he was very, very young. He was about 13 or 14, and honestly, the way that these two acted, if the boy had have been around David's age, you would have assumed that they were boyfriends because they were so close. They were so, like, clearly intimate out in public. But this was a 13-year-old boy and a 23-year-old man. David would provide this kid with drugs and alcohol. He would bring him around to his house all the time where they would just drink and watch movies and smoke weed. And then one night, when they were just hanging out, David got that urge to kill once again. He waited until his young friend was asleep. He then went to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, and stabbed this kid about 5 or 6 times before he woke up and managed to push David off of him. Somehow, this kid managed to go to the hospital and get treated for these injuries, and he survived. After being stabbed 5 or 6 times in the stomach, he was nearly disemboweled. And he survived that. And of course, because he did survive, he was able to tell police everything. He knew exactly who had done this to him. And so David Morst was charged with attempted murder. But the most frustrating twist ever, he managed to get away with it. He said, he's written in his journal, his diary thing, that he stood up there on the dock. What is it? Where they get asked questions in court? He stood up there and lied. And he wrote about it in his journal, laughing about the fact that he lied and he managed to get away with it. Everyone believed his lies. Not long after that, so he'd gotten away with that and police were leaving him alone. And he was trying to get back on with his life, but never worked for David Morst. He was always overcome with some sort of negative emotion. And right now, he was really fixating on that boy that had sexually assaulted him in the care home. I don't know if something might have triggered it around this particular time, I don't know. But for some reason, he was really fixating on that boy and he really wanted revenge for what he had done to him all those years ago. And now, David Morst wanted to hunt that guy down and get back at him. He wanted to kill his rapist. So he set out to go and find him. I believe he did actually know where the boy's house was, like at the time when they were in this care home. He knew where his family lived. So he made his way to that house, but obviously by now this boy had grown up and moved out and he wasn't there. So David Morst went to his house and was unsuccessful in finding this guy. So he starts walking home and he's feeling pretty defeated. He had set out to get revenge on his rapist that night and now he can't. So he's just walking down the street and then he notices this 15-year-old boy walking towards him. This young lad was called Donald Jones. David Morse approached him and asked if he would be willing to do some tasks for him to get a little bit of money. And I don't know if he told him straight up what these tasks were, but I think he gave the implied that they were quite like shady tasks, maybe little like petty crimes, maybe drug trafficking of some sort. Either way, Donald Jones got the vibe of what David was asking him to do, and he was up for it. He wanted a bit of money. And so David invited Donald to get into his car, and they were going to go for a drive and they could chat about it. So they did. Donald jumped in the car and the two of them are driving for hours, just chatting. After a while of driving, they eventually arrived at a quarry, which was like pretty much completely abandoned. And David stopped the car there. He reached into the back of the car and grabbed 2 beers, and he handed one to this 15-year-old boy, and they crack them open and they're chatting for a while. They go through a good few amount of drinks. They were here for about an hour or so and they were chatting normally. They were having a good time. That was until David just switched again, like he did last time. It was like he was friendly, until he wasn't anymore. And then he was a completely different man. He was cold, he was emotionless. He grabbed Donald and just threw him to the ground, where he started beating him with his bare hands. He was kicking him, he was really beating him up. He stabbed him, he choked him as well. Choking was a big thing for David Morse. I don't know what the psychology was behind it for him, but that was something that he did to every single one of his victims, whether they were a surviving one or one that lost their lives. That was something that was very steady throughout David's crimes. But he wasn't even done there. So he'd beaten this boy, choked him, stabbed him, and somehow Donald was still alive. And David wasn't done there. To finish it all off, David grabbed Donald and threw him into a body of water at the quarry and just left him there. Knowing that he was too weak, too injured to have been able to pull himself out of that water, he was just gonna drown in there and die. Donald Jones was 15 at the time, like I said, and David Morse was about 27, I want to say, when he killed him. And he's killed 2 people now, so he's not a serial killer just yet. That's not for lack of trying, though. He did try and kill one other person, but he wasn't successful, so that was just an attempted murder. If it had been successful, he would be a serial killer right now, but he was going to keep trying anyway. He was going to get there. In the next couple of days, before Donald Jones's body was even found, David decided to run away to Texas. He didn't even want to be there when they found Donald's body. He didn't want the chance of it getting traced back to him, so he just ran away, went to start a new life once again. But he only continued being a menace to society there in Texas as well. He was doing the same thing where he would go up to these young boys that he was very clearly attracted to and trying to, you know, do awful things with. He would approach these boys and, just like with Donald, he would offer them money for like little jobs that didn't even exist. They were fake jobs. He never had any jobs that he wanted them to do. It was just a good way to lure these young boys into his company alone, because what young lad is going to turn down a bit of money for doing an easy task? Teenagers are desperate for a bit of pocket money, and if it's a little job that they think is quite easy, then of course they're going to take it. His next victim was a 14-year-old boy that he had done this to. This boy had voluntarily gotten into David's car on the promise that he was going to set him up on some odd jobs to earn a bit of money. The two of them started driving. David drove them all the way to a motel. And I don't know at what point this 14-year-old boy realised that this wasn't legit and it wasn't as it seemed. But either way, they got to this motel, they got inside the bedroom. David then threw the boy on the bed and tied him to it so he couldn't move, he couldn't defend himself, and then David just starts beating him with his hands, with different objects as weapons. But then suddenly he stopped. It was as if that violent, aggressive part of his brain had just switched off again. It was as if normal David was suddenly in the room again. It was like normal David had gone and he was just now back in his body and he was seeing what he was doing. He dropped the weapons and he was disgusted in himself that he had essentially caught himself doing this again. Apparently, in that moment, he started sobbing, like crying, screaming, wailing uncontrollably, because he had realised in that moment what an evil monster he had become. He was abusing this child that he had kidnapped and tied to a bed. He had murdered 2 people before, tried to murder others, and it was as if he was just realising all of this in this moment. He had these moments quite a lot, moments of realisation where it was like he would snap into a sane mind for a very short amount of time and then he'd be out of it again within like a day. But because he was in this kind of state of mind right now, he just let this teenager go. He felt really bad for what he'd done, so he let the kid go. The kid obviously went to police. David got caught and he was sentenced to another 5 years in prison for this. And actually, it was while he was in prison for this assault of this 14-year-old boy, that was when police were getting on to him about connections to the Donald Jones murder. Because what state was that in? Chicago? It was in a different state completely. And police there were kind of trying to figure out who had killed Donald. And they were looking for people that lived in the area at the time that had like serious criminal records. And of course, David Morse popped up because he had been in prison for manslaughter, all sorts. So they tried to track him down for an interview. They tried to call him in. And that was when they realized that he had very suspiciously skipped town right after Donald went missing. It was all looking a bit dodgy right now. And that was when they also noticed that his home address was not far from where Donald's body was found. It was literally like a few streets away. He had taken Donald. They'd driven for ages, must have driven in like loops. And then he'd eventually brought him back to this quarry that was very close to his house because he knew that that was probably a good place to kill someone in quiet without anyone noticing. But yeah, police are finding all these little pieces of evidence and they're all pointing to David being the killer, aren't they? So they start looking into where David Morse is right now, and that was when they learned that he is currently in prison in Texas for the attempted murder of another young boy. That's practically the exact same crime that they're investigating right now. A teen boy that has been assaulted and killed. And he is literally convicted of doing that exact thing just a couple of months prior. Police really think that they're on to him now. They pretty much knew that David was the killer here, and so they charged him with the murder and they got him extradited back out to Illinois for the trial. But it actually took 12 years for this murder case to go to trial. For 12 years, he'd been extradited to Illinois and he was just sitting in a holding cell for 12 years. Anyway, eventually this goes to trial. He is found guilty of the murder of Donald Jones. In fact, I think he pled guilty to it. I don't even think he tried to get away with it. He pled guilty, and then he was sentenced to just over 30 years in prison. A lot of sources said different things. It was between 30 and 35 years. But, and you're not going to believe this, you're not going to like this, guys, hold on. They actually took 12 years off of that sentence that they gave him because he had just been sitting in prison for 12 years waiting for the trial. So they decided to count that in his sentence, which I know some of you won't agree with, some of you might agree with it. But this next part, I know a lot of you won't agree with. Apparently, he had been so well behaved in prison that they halved the rest of his time. So they took 12 years off that 30 summer, and then whatever was left, they then halved that again because he'd been well behaved in prison. Literally a murderer. Literally a child murderer. A repeat offender, and they halved his time for good behaviour. So all in all, I think he only served about 6 years for the murder of a 15-year-old boy. That makes me so angry. Well, to be fair, he did kind of serve the 12 years as he was waiting for trial, but I don't know. I don't actually know how I feel about that. Let me know how you feel about that. When the time came for David's early release, he was scared. Again, he was feeling those same feelings that he felt the last time they tried to release him from prison. He didn't think he belonged out there. He didn't want to be out there because despite him continually committing the same heinous crimes, he still maintained that he was disgusted in himself, disgusted in his actions, and he wanted to stop. He didn't want to be like that. So then why does he keep doing it? Murder is not an addiction that you can't help, you know? He was voluntarily putting himself in situations where he's gonna meet young boys, and he knows that he wants to do this to young boys. So don't go to the swimming pool. Simply don't go and perv on young boys at a swimming pool if you don't want to find yourself murdering one of them. If you know that that's what you're like, don't do it. Don't do it. He wanted to stay locked away from society forever because he knew that he just couldn't control these urges that he had. So much so that he actually wrote a 5-page letter to the Department of Corrections to like practically beg them to not let him out. The prosecutor on his trial even wrote a letter to the Department of Corrections as well, saying the same thing, being like, look, this guy is really blooming dangerous. He is a repeat offender. He has shown that he has harmed teenage boys several times now, killed them, and we're just gonna let him out. But despite all of this, they let him out anyway for some reason, and now he was in his late 40s. He tried to stay out of trouble a little bit when he came out of prison, but I mean, those urges were always gonna creep back in, weren't they? The first time that he had a violent outburst after leaving prison, that time, he was just like chilling with his friend, and I think they got into an argument. And so David grabbed a big metal pipe and started beating his friend over the head with it. He fully, like, this was some serious damage. He split this guy's head completely open. I've seen a picture of the scar, it's huge. But David actually completely got away with this incident. It was never even reported to the police because the guy that he hit over the head was, I think, wanted by police, or at least police didn't like him. Either way, he wasn't mates with the police and he was not gonna voluntarily go and speak to them and report this. So it was never reported. David was never, he never saw any consequences for that. Again, after that, David tried to lay low for a little bit. I mean, his whole life was just a constant battle of getting into trouble and then regretting it, but then somehow forgetting that he regrets it and then going on to do it again. And then he gets hit by that remorse again. And honestly, it's up to you whether you believe it was genuine remorse and regret or whether he's just faking and pretending to try and get out of prison or whatever. But I don't know, there's something in me that really truly believes that he does have these remorseful episodes, if you can call it that. He seems to have flashes of conscience, which you never really see in serial killers. It's more so the other way around, where they're like good day to day and then they get these like evil flashes, whereas he's evil day to day and gets good flashes. Anyway, after the pipe incident where he beat his friend over the head, he decided that he was once again gonna move and get a fresh start. This time he decided to move to Indiana, but he did some research before he went, and this man was pre-planning how he was going to be a paedophile in Indiana. It's crazy. He chose where he was going to apply for jobs on purpose. Like, he only applied for jobs in places where he knew that teenage boys were going to be. He ended up getting a job at, I think it was a game shop. But yeah, he was applying at all the cinemas, arcades, game shops. Anywhere that he would stalk before, he now wanted to get a job there. So he had a legitimate reason to be around teenage boys all day. About a month into working at this game shop, David gets a new co-worker, 19-year-old Nick James. And immediately, David sets his sights on Nick James. He tried to establish just a normal friendship, well, what seemed like a normal friendship to Nick, but of course David knew that it wasn't going to be a normal friendship. David starts chatting to him here and there at work. He invites him back to his apartment for drinks and Nick goes. He thinks he's making friends with this older co-worker. Little does he know that David has other plans. But as this friendship is kind of going on, David realizes that Nick is kind of taking advantage of him. Like, David would always buy his victims alcohol, drugs, give them money. He was a groomer. Like, that was a big characteristic of his murders, especially. He would groom the boys before he would kill them. He would spend months giving them everything they wanted, making them like him. But the reason that David thought that Nick was using him was because he was doing all this usual stuff, buying him all this stuff, buying him mainly alcohol. And Nick would come to his house, they would have a drink or two of the alcohol, and then Nick would take the rest of it home to have with his friends. And David felt used. He felt like Nick was just using him for the alcohol. He was just staying to be polite for 1 or 2 drinks, and then he would leave to go and spend time with other people that he preferred. And this made David feel awful. And as David started clocking on to this fact, he was getting really angry, of course, and that was when he felt those murderous urges start to creep back in. This time as an act of revenge. So he invited Nick round to his house one more time, and it was just normal. It was just like the others. They were just sat there having a drink. And again, at some point, David just switched. He became cold emotionless. He was scaring Nick. He grabbed a bat and just started beating Nick to death with it. So he's going and going and going, and then halfway through he just stops. And this time it wasn't in the same way as the previous times when he would stop halfway through and kind of realize what he was doing and like give up. This time he paused because he realized that he was getting blood everywhere. Him beating this young boy on his floor was splattering too much blood all over the carpets, and he needed to minimize the mess. So he paused, right? Nick is fighting for his life on the floor. He is moaning in pain, right? David has paused for a second. He goes and gets out a large plastic tarp, lays it on the living room floor, and then drags Nick's half lifeless body back onto this tarp, where he then continues beating him until this time he actually killed him. Once he'd finished, David sat down for a second, caught his breath, and then wrapped Nick's body up in this plastic tarp and carried it down to the basement, where he then just covered it in concrete, let the concrete set around it, and now this dead body was encased in the floor of his basement forever. He was hoping that no one was ever going to be able to find that body. If he had enclosed it in cement, no one was ever going to check inside the floor of his basement. Over the next few days, David Morse went about life the same as always, because he knew that he wasn't going to get caught. He knew that no one was going to find a body anytime soon. Meanwhile, Nick James's family are so panicked, unbelievably panicked. They have reported him missing to the police. Searches were done, missing persons posters were put out, but of course, Nick wasn't found. David had gotten away with it once again, only this time he didn't seem remorseful at all. And this was quite a rarity. At least, he's not even pretending to be remorseful at this point. At this point, he fully admitted that, like, he didn't care. In fact, this time, after the murder of Nick James, he was quite eager to do it again. And very quickly, after he had encased his last murder victim in the cement of his floor, David Morse was out looking for his next victim. The next victim that David Morse took a liking to was a 13-year-old boy that he had been watching at the swimming pool for quite some time. He was called Michael Dennis. David called Michael over at the swimming pool and he told him about these bullshit jobs that he used to offer kids, fake jobs, you know, for a little bit of money to lure them away, and Michael fell for it. Over the coming weeks, David and Michael formed a friendship, as much of a friendship as a nearing 50-year-old man can have with a 13-year-old boy. They start hanging out together a lot. David invites Michael back to his apartment most nights, and actually Michael starts bringing his best friend round, which David is more than happy for. This best friend was 16-year-old James Regagni. James and Michael would go around to David's house honestly most nights a week. That was kind of like their chill spot. He would give them alcohol, drugs, anything they wanted, they had there. There was no reason for them to hang out anywhere else. This is what I mean. He would fully groom his victims because he knew that he was able to give them things that they wanted that they couldn't get themselves because they were either too young to drink or didn't have money for drugs or alcohol or anything. He knew that he could supply these kids with something that they needed, and that was how he was going to get close to them. So now that he's got these two victims in the palm of his hand, David Morse decides to make his move. On this particular day, the three of them had been drinking since like noon, and it was now about 10 p.m, so they were all very tired. All three of them just kind of passed out in different areas of the house, and David was the first of the three to wake up a couple of hours later, and he realized that right now was the perfect time. Both of them were asleep, the house was quiet, they were defenseless. Now he could kill them both. So he first approached James Regagni, who was asleep on the bedroom floor. He walked over to him, wrapped a rope around his neck, and just squeezed as tightly as he possibly could. So tight that James couldn't even make any kind of noise. He couldn't murmur in pain or anything. And David squeezed this rope until James's body went limp. and he had killed him. After this, David actually had a bit of a rest. He waited for a few minutes, must have sat back on the bed just with this dead body next to him. He gets his strength back, gets his breath back, and then he goes to find his next victim. He walked downstairs to where Michael Dennis was passed out in one of the chairs, asleep. David approached with the exact same rope that he had just used to kill this boy's best friend. He then wrapped it around Michael's neck too, and did the exact same thing. He strangled both of those boys to death in one night. And now he had two bodies to hide. So he goes back into his basement and he digs a really big hole, like twice as deep as the last one that he built. And then he drags both of these bodies in. He threw both of the bodies into the hole and then filled it up with concrete, hoping that, again, no one was ever going to find any of these three bodies that were now encased in the floor of his basement. I know I keep reiterating that, but that's insane to me. That's like having bodies in your walls. That's horrifying. Later that same day, the boys' parents had arrived home from work and they found, I don't know which boys' parents it was that found this, but one of them found a note from the two lads saying that they were running away and not to bother trying to find them. And we don't know whose idea this note is, and this really intrigues me. Was it David that made them write that note because he knew that he was going to kill them that night and he wanted, you know, some sort of explanation as to why they weren't around? Or did the boys write it? Did David make them believe that they were all going to run away? Did he tell them, like, oh yeah, let's all just move out somewhere? And did the boys write this note themselves because they actually thought they were running away? I wonder. Either way, whatever the circumstances, the boys' parents were not happy that they had run away. They were 13 and 16 years old. They were worried about them. They wanted them back, and so they reported both of their boys missing. Police did their usual investigative work. They went and interviewed everyone in the boys' lives, all their friends, and very quickly they found out about David Morst. The boys hadn't kept their friendship with David Morst a secret from their other friends because they didn't think there was anything weird in it. They didn't realise that they were getting groomed. They didn't realise David's true intentions with them. So they'd just been like, yeah, we see this old guy that buys us alcohol and drugs all the time. It's sick. So now police know the name David Morst. They know that he was close with both of these young boys that have just gone missing. And so they decide to run his name on the database. And that was when they pulled up his horrific, violent criminal history. And his specific victim type, all of these people that he was charged and convicted of assaulting or murdering, they were all young teenage boys, just like the two boys that were missing. So immediately police get a warrant to search David Morst's house. They bring cadaver dogs in and everything, and they take these dogs down into the basement and they start barking at this one, like just in the corner of the room, in one random little corner, and there wasn't even anything in that corner for them to be barking at. They were just barking. The guy that was working with the dogs thought that they were just being silly. So like he pulled them back into the middle of the room and he kind of like reset, you know, and sent them off again. But they just went into that same corner and started barking again. And he was like, I know this looks weird, but we need to trust them. They go into this spot for a reason. And they honestly tried to like reset the dogs multiple times. They like took them outside of the house and like reminded them what they were supposed to be smelling. I don't know how the dog thing works. But they would take them into this basement and literally like 3-4 times this happened where they went into this same corner and started barking. And the guy that like looked after the dogs, he was like, you better start like cracking into the walls and the floor because the dogs have spoken. They were clearly trying to alert to something in that corner of the room, whatever it was. And so this guy recommended that they start cracking open that concrete just in case. In the meantime, police started speaking with David Morst in relation to these two missing boys, and he said that he hadn't seen them in weeks and he was worried too, you know? He hadn't seen them in ages either. They ended up giving David a polygraph test about this to see if he'd actually seen the boys in the last 2 weeks, and it came back that he passed. Because, I mean, he wasn't lying. He hadn't seen the boys in a while because they were stuck in his walls. Actually, no, they were stuck in his floor. It was me that said the thing about bodies in the walls, wasn't it? So yeah, he technically passed that because I think they just asked the wrong questions. And technically it is true. He hadn't seen them in a while, but polygraph tests are dodgy at the best of times, but I mean, back then they were probably believed a lot more. That being said, just because they kind of believed this polygraph test didn't mean that they were ruling him out as a suspect completely, because, I mean, the dogs still had gone crazy in that one corner of his room. They were still going to look into that. That was still far too suspicious. And finally, when they got permission to drill into the concrete in his basement, they found all the evidence they needed. They found all 3 boys' bodies. And remember, they were only looking for 2 at this point in time. And then they stumble across the body of Nick James. One that they never expected to find. One that they had never even connected with David Morst. And then suddenly they're drilling through this concrete and they find the dead body of a missing boy that's been missing for months. So David was put on trial for these 3 murders and he was found guilty. And then he was finally given a prison sentence that was worth serving. He was given 3 life terms, 1 for each of the boys' lives that he had taken. Well, the ones that he was on trial for right now. He definitely didn't serve anywhere near enough for his previous crimes and his previous murder and attempted murders, but at least for this one, he was seeing some proper, actual time in prison. He was never going to get out of prison. 3 life terms, you're in there until you die. And honestly, it wasn't going to be very long until David did die. Just a month into his sentence, David Morst committed suicide. He tied his bed sheets together and hung himself from the bars in his cell at the age of 51. Prison guards found a suicide note next to his body that confessed to 5 murders, all 5 that we've talked about in this video. He apologised to all of the families of his victims. He also implied in this note that he was disappointed that he hadn't gotten the death penalty for his murders because he truly felt that he deserved it, and he felt that if he had been kept in prison and kept away from society, he wouldn't have committed as many crimes as he had. He also said in this note that he didn't feel it was fair for people's tax money to be going towards keeping such a disgusting person like himself in prison. He knew that, and he didn't want people to have to pay for him. He wanted to die so that he was just gone from the world and he couldn't hurt anyone else. And that is all I have for this case. That was the story of Crazy Dave. And this one is such a crazy one. Like I said in the beginning, this is one of the most interesting cases to me because it's like he knows he's doing heinous things, but he cannot stop himself. I'm so interested in the psychology of that. It seems to manifest as like an addiction for this man, although we don't know how accurate that is. He might be just wording it like that just to make people feel like sorry for him and make it sound like he didn't have a choice, he had to kill. I don't know, maybe he is quite manipulative in the way that he's wording that, but if it's genuine and if it did actually feel like an addiction to him, then that's crazy. Thank you again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. Remember, if you go to nordvpn.com/Eleanor, the link is also down below in the description. There'll be an exclusive deal waiting there for you, and it is completely risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. A huge thank you to all of my channel members for supporting the channel and helping me decide the cases that I cover. All of my tier 2 members are on screen right now, so thank you so much. If you want to become a channel member, you can click the join button down below. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed, please leave a thumbs up. That would really help me out. Leave a comment down below. I'm always reading the comments on these videos. I love hearing what you guys have to say. If you want to watch another one of my videos, there you go. I've picked you one out special. Or if you want to subscribe to the channel, I post true crime content all the time over here. You don't want to miss it. Anyway, bye. See you next time.